כולם? שומעים אותי בסדר? Yes? Great. Hi. I'm Idan. And I speak Hebrew, but I'm American. So I'm actually going to give my talk in English. Does anybody mind? No?
Do we have a choice?
Fucking awesome.
לא מבינים מה אמרת, אז כן.
No hablo español. So I'm here to talk to you guys about typography in the web. Who here knows what typography is? Oh, okay, excellent. Who here thinks that typography is awesome? Yeah, you're about right. Okay, so yeah, who am I? So I'm a web developer. I'm like a hybrid designer-developer mix. Sorry? I'm a diviner.
There's a new word in the web.
Okay. I'm not a developer. I don't know, whatever I am. And I'm one of the core developers of Django. Who here has heard of Django? Who here uses Django? And for my current project and my long list of projects, or my main project right now, something called Umbrella, I launched a data visualization studio. We build data visualizations using modern web tools, specifically stuff involving geo and maps. And yeah, anyway, that's all you really need to know about me. Right, so what is typography, right? It's not an art, it's not a science, it's something in the middle of how we present textual information, which when you think about it, for most of the things that we build, most of the information that we're presenting is text, right? Sometimes you have graphics, sometimes you have charts, sometimes you have things that are graphical that convey meaning, but most of the time, most of the meaning that you're presenting is text. So it makes sense as web developers, we care about like a lot of shit, you know, that makes our websites better and faster and awesomer and whatever. This is something you should know a little bit about. If you know something about how far future expires headers work, you should know something about this because it makes an impact on your web application just like good caching does. Okay, now a lot of people think that typography has only to do with fonts, right? Everybody thinks that fonts is typography, right? Wrong. Fonts are not just typography. Typography is like the superset around fonts. You can talk about typography in terms of the way a font looks. And that's definitely a part of typography. And it comes from how people used to actually draw letters back when there was no such thing as a printing press and every book involved somebody writing out letters. Then different people had different styles and those are fonts. But good typography is like good architecture. It's not just about the micro, how the font looks, how the style of the lines look. It also has to do with structure. And just as you have these macro elements of structure in buildings, typographers for centuries have been figuring out interesting ways to lay out type on a page in a way that improves the user experience of people using these products, namely books. Now, you have to remember that in the beginning, books cost like cars, right? Each book you bought was like $500,000 in today's money. Because the paper was expensive, the ink was expensive, and you had to hire like a small company of people to actually write out each copy. Right. So they did a lot of thinking about what the user experience of type needed to be, how they would lay out type on a page, the macro level and the micro level. Even though this looks hard to read to us, at the time this was like, oh my god, the height of awesome for printed matter on a page. They left room for people to hold the book at the edges with their hands because if every book costs like a car, you don't want people touching the letters with their fingers because eventually the letters would wear off. Right? And you needed room to write corrections in the margins because over time maybe somebody noticed an error or maybe there's an update, there's new news about how to do something. You need room for that. Right. So print designers have had like a few centuries to refine how they go about doing this type on a page thing. And the hallmark of what they do has always been control. They have full control, right? They control the size of the type, they control where the type is, they control the shape of the paper, they control the color of everything, they control it all. Except on the web, yeah, I'm in the frame? Okay, sweet. Except on the web, here, I'll go over here. Except on the web, there's no control, right? There's absolutely no control. over almost anything. All these things that we used to be able to control in type, in print, we have no control over on the web. So say you want to have a specific font. You can ask the browser for a font. You can say, I want this font. But there's a decent chance that it'll tell you, no, you can't have this font. You don't really have control over the size or the shape, the geometry of the screens that you're targeting. No idea if people are looking at it on this or they're looking at it on some gigantic television. No idea. And you definitely don't have any control over pixel density, which is like a whole other dimension, right? We used to have only X and Y. Now we have like a density measure for pixels. And that makes a difference to how we render type. And even at the level of like platforms, how the type is actually rendered. Different platforms render type differently and anti-alias type differently. This sort of blurring you see at the edges of the text to make it look smooth on screens. It's different for every platform, and even within one platform. When you look at Windows, you have the old GDI and you have the new DirectWrite, and they render type completely differently. You look at it and it doesn't look the same. So you have to take that into account when designing for the screen. So, and none of this is stuff that you have control of, right? So basically, designing for the web is you ask for what you want, and if you're smart, you ask for what you want if you can't have what you want. And if you're smarter, you ask for a few more things, all the way down to if you can have none of what you want, what do you want anyway? Okay? So that's pretty much typography in the web. Now, 13 years ago, right, in 2000, John Alsop wrote this. Who read this? Really? You guys suck. Okay? A Tao of web design. Seriously, you know what? I should shut up now and you should all just read it right now because it's far more important than anything I'm ever going to say. This man made a prophecy in the year 2000 of what designing for the web would be like. You should read every word of this thing. It's not technical. It's really awesome, and it explains how designing for the web is all about letting go of control. That you don't have that control anyway, and trying to impose that control only makes things break. So be flexible in the web, and typography is very much about this. Now, like I said, in print they've had centuries to make their typography awesome, and on the web we started out at the monkey stage. We're still way behind. And basically everything that I'm going to talk about today is all baby steps moving forward and catching up with the abilities that print designers have had for years, okay? Centuries, literally hundreds of years. Right, now it's going to be intense. It's a lot of technical crap. Don't worry, the slides will be online. Don't write anything down. Just sit back and let the information come at your eyeballs. Okay, CSS3 units. Who here loves these? Yes, you do. Okay, there's lots of new ways to specify units in CSS3. Bereshit, we had pixels and we had ems. We had a few other things that nobody ever used, right? We had percents, sorry, as well. We had absolute and we had relative. The problem with absolute is that it's kind of a print way of thinking. It's I'm going to specify how many pixels I want it. What?
Pixels are not absolute.
They were back before we had multiple density screens. They're still relatively absolute. As far as the spec calls them an absolute unit. It's still actually called an absolute unit. No, I'm wrong. So what is it called?
Eric Mayer's CSS2 from 2004 to 2005 is a relative unit.
This is news to me because I looked at the CSS3 spec today, but maybe I'm wrong. Whatever. Relatively absolute. So you'd specify pixel sizes, and everybody who ever worked with IE back in the golden days of web development, like IE5, knows that if you specified font sizes in pixels and people asked to change that by zooming, nothing would happen in Internet Explorer, and you'd basically be fucking your users because they couldn't make the text larger. So if you had, say, old people using your site and they wanted bigger type, or people with glasses, then they couldn't actually get what they wanted. Whereas if you specified everything in relative terms, you could grow, shrink, stretch. It was great. It worked exactly the way you'd sort of expect it to work, kind of. Right, so absolute sizes suck, and it assumes a lot about browsers and the people that use them. And so, somewhere around that time, the whole web standards movement, CSS, blah, 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 and people were like, you should only use relative units, ems and percents. They're basically the same, except that one only applies, ems only applies to the sizing. Like if you're going to apply ems to text, it'll refer to the size of the parent, the container's text size, and percent will refer to the container's size itself. But otherwise, they're about the same. When you're talking in terms of text, it doesn't matter which one you use, they're equivalent. And you can do the math very simply, like 1.2 equals 120%, you know. Okay. Why ems? You should read this stuff by Richard Rudder because it's awesome, and I'm not going to talk any more about it now. And by default, all browsers settled on 16 pixels as the default, you know, 1EM 100% is 16 pixels. The user agent default for body, that's the word I was looking for. So this is great, okay? But who here knows about how ems stack? Anybody really understand this? Yeah? A few people? Okay, awesome. So, right, if you have like, you know, HTML body, header, H1, and you specify these relative sizes in CSS, this is the size that you're actually going to come out with. It's like 1, because that's the default for HTML, times 1.2, times 3, times 1.5. You end up with 5.4 ems or 86.4 pixels. That's great. Except it's not great when you have this, right? Okay, who here can tell me what sizes these two H1s will have? First of all, can anybody tell me if they're going to be the same or they're going to be different?
Different.
Time's up. Okay, who here thinks they'll be the same? Who here thinks they'll be different? You guys are right. Yeah, they will be different. Simply because if you look at it, it stacks differently in every case. Header and article have different sizes. So the H1 inherits from whatever its current parent is. So that's how the chain goes. 1 times 1.5 times 2, or 1 times 1 times 2. Do you see now why this is a pain in the ass? Yes. Everybody who has ever used ems has run into this and been like, ah, this is a pain in the ass. Rems to the rescue. Who here has heard of rems? Root ems. Root ems are awesome because they're like ems, but they are relative to the root element of your document, which is HTML. So if you do the same calculation, you have an HTML, a body, a header, an H1. If you do it with ems, you do like the full like times, 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 and you end up with something. When you do it with root ems, it skips over everything in the middle and does it relative to the root. It's fantastic. It's well supported in all the browsers you really give a shit about, and it's not well supported by the browsers that you don't like. But there are polyfills for them. Look up the polyfills, and it's awesome. You can use this today. Use it. It's great. And it has a couple of neat tricks. Who here has heard of this elastic pixel thing? This is actually pretty neat. You can set the HTML font size to 1 pixel, right? Which sounds stupid until you think that basically from now on you can refer to rems as elastic pixels anywhere you want in the scope of the chain, and it'll resize. It'll be relative to like 1 CSS pixel, which is device independent, which is awesome. This is a cool technique that you can use for a lot of things like fitting text to viewports and all sorts of stuff like that. It's pretty cool. Check it out, look into it. There's like a nice, this JSPin link shows you exactly how it works. So right. But those aren't the only new units in CSS3. Viewport height, viewport width, and viewport min. These are 3 new units also. These are viewport units. When you want to talk about the size of your viewport, if it's a browser, if it's the browser on mobile. This is in the spec. Basically, 1 viewport unit and 1 VH or 1 VW equals 1% of the viewport dimension. If it's height, it's height. If it's width, it's width. So 100 of them equals 100% of your viewport. Vmin works, it's basically the smaller of the 2. So if your aspect is like this, it'll be the width. If your aspect is like this, it'll be the height. It's a nice way to figure out aspect ratios. For example, I'd like the picture to fit into the viewport, right? This is how you do it in CSS3. And it's also well supported in some browsers and really not well supported in others. But it's coming soon to all the browsers you care about, and seeing as automatic updates have been turned on for Gecko, for Firefox for a while now, that means that once it does get turned on, you can expect to be able to use it for them rapidly.
And Presto is dead anyway.
And Presto, nobody gives a shit about it, so whatever. Any Opera users in the room? Wow, not even one. Awesome. Every time I have like a conference and I'm like, does anybody use Opera? There's always like the one dude who's just like, yeah, man, I freaking love that. And I'm like, why? Right, so CSS3 units, they're awesome. They're a lot of fun. They give you like good control over the structure of your page. Remember we talked about the architecture of type, how you lay type out. Not like the look of the font, but where the text is relative to one another. Pay attention to the compatibility tables. There's gotchas like in Chrome, it supports it, but not for setting border widths or all sorts of stuff like that. There's still lots of gotchas while it gets ironed out, but it's getting better fast. And it's already almost at the point that I'd consider using it in a production web application with polyfills and relevant fallbacks, blah, blah, blah. Basically, I'd use it to progressively enhance something, but I wouldn't rely on it yet. Right. Okay, web fonts. Everybody's favorite subject, because web fonts are pretty, right? Everybody loves the default fonts, but they hate the, everybody loves fonts but hates the default fonts, right? We all like new and unique fonts. So we're used to seeing a sort of font stack, right? Everybody knows how the font stack works. Who here really knows how the font stack works? I expected more hands and then I would be able to school you, but I guess not. So yeah, okay, so the font family, do you know that the font stack is applied character by character? It's not actually applied at an element level, which means if you have these 3 fonts in your stack, and you have, it's kind of hard to tell the yellow from the green. That's a shame. But like all the funky Unicode characters are yellow, just so you know. If you have this font stack, it'll actually use it character by character. So when it runs across a character that it doesn't have the first font, like it doesn't exist in the first font in the stack, it'll check for that character in the second font in the stack, and it'll keep going until it finds one that is in the stack. So actually, the stack is not applied by element. It's not like it chooses, okay, P, what's in the P? I can use like the first font in the stack. I'll use it for everything. No, it does it character by character. So this is good. This is a very good thing because it allows font fallbacks. Yes?
I think you're using Mac, right?
Yes.
So I think you're wrong. You're missing Arial Hebrew because Shalom is not in Arial.
You are absolutely correct, and I was worried that somebody would point that out, but I didn't want to put Arial Hebrew up there because it would be like more confusing, blah, blah, blah. But yes, you're right. Arial doesn't actually contain like the Hebrew code points, but whatever. Well played, sir. Well played. You get a cookie and a gold star. Okay, so ampersands. Who here loves ampersands? I do. Ampersands can be really pretty. There's lots of very beautiful ampersands. There's actually a great post by Dan Cederholm, Simple Bits, called Use the Best Available Ampersand. There's a link at the bottom. You'll go read it later because it's also, again, better than my talk. Talks about how do you use nicer ampersands. Like you can have like text and then use like a more interesting ampersand. It turns out that because of this character by character nature of the font fallback mechanism, you can actually specify like, okay, I want to span around this ampersand, and then just give a different font family for that span. And everywhere I have an ampersand, if I wrap it in that, it'll use the nicer ampersand if it has it, and fall back to the normal one if it doesn't.
You can do it without wrapping.
You can do it without wrapping as well. You can do it like 18 different ways. But this is an easy way to do it.
You can define a font with only ampersand.
With only an ampersand. Yes, I'm getting there. Hold on. Shwai. Right, okay. So this font stack, it's awesome. But basically, it's a controlled mechanism for accessing like a local database of fonts. Right? When you think about it, that's sort of what it is. And by default, it only knows about locally installed fonts. It doesn't know about any other fonts. And CSS3 font face is really a way to control this database. It's a way to put things in, override things. It's basically, you need to think about it kind of like a database tool for your font stack. Okay, the font face rule in its entirety and what it can have inside it. Somewhere in your CSS, you go add font face. You need to supply a family name, right? Whatever family name you want. You need to supply a source, some source. Sources can come in 2 flavors. It can go local or URL. Local, you need to supply with a string that matches onto one of the locally installed fonts names. And this is actually kind of tricky, and we'll get to it in a second. If it's a URL, you need to give it basically a URI to some font file. And that also gets tricky, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Unicode range. Who here knows about Unicode range? You do, shut up. Yes, Unicode range is great because it basically lets you say, this font knows how to talk about these code points from here to here. And you can actually have multiple Unicode ranges if you notice. So you can say it knows how to do this to this, it knows how to do this, it knows how to do all of these, and some of those, and that's what this font knows how to do. And this is a neat way to specify fallbacks like Alex mentioned, because you can say that this font, for example, only knows how to do this Unicode code point. It would be an incredibly wasteful way to do it, because you'd have to download the whole font file only to show just that one character. But you could do that, and I guess if you're already downloading, it doesn't matter. The other ones, font variant, feature setting, stretch, weight, and style, these are just like the rules you use in the rest of your CSS, except instead of saying what you want, here you're saying what this font face provides. So if you say font weight bold, what you're basically telling the font database is, here's the font file for this font family in bold. So if somebody asks for this font family in bold, use me. Okay? It's that simple, even though it looks kind of complex and it can get long and hairy. It really is all it is. So let's look at some examples. Font face, font family, blah, blah, blah. Source, see, local and local. You can actually have multiple local sources because sometimes on different platforms, the same font is named different things. In particular, anybody who's ever worked with variants of Helvetica knows this. And you can also supply as a fallback like a, no. You can also supply like a web-based fallback if they don't have the font installed. And browsers will do the right thing. If they can use the local one, they will. And if they can't, only then they'll hit the network and actually fetch the files. So this is a great way to minimize loading web fonts if you don't actually need them. For example, if you want to provide Helvetica on Windows. Font weight bold. Okay, will this actually work? No, it won't work because I'm asking for normal and I haven't supplied the normal weight. I've told it that this is bold. I've asked for normal. Sometimes it can work in the other way. If you ask for bold, but you have the normal, some browsers will do fake bolding, which looks gross. You shouldn't use it. And they won't actually tell you that they're doing it. You'll just see that your type looks kind of crappy. So here is actually the right way you want to do it. Ask for the ones that you have. But what if you have multiple weights of the same thing? Well, it turns out that that's nope. I skipped over that. Oh, this is the multiple weights. I switched the slide order. If you have multiple weights, you do more than one font face rule, right? You say for the same font family, one is normal, one is bold. You point it at the different files, and boom, you can use bold, you can use not bold, you can use whatever you want, and the browser will sort it out for you automatically. The code point range is great for everybody here does sites in Hebrew and in English, or more languages. Question? Okay, Hebrew and English. Here is the Unicode range for Hebrew. It's 590 to 5FF. You can load a file that's a Hebrew file. It doesn't actually contain English glyphs or code points, really. And say, here's the Unicode range that this file knows how to do. So if you use the lovely Aleph font, which if you don't yet know about, you should, because it's beautiful and it's Hebrew and it's free. You can load it and make sure that it only gets applied to Hebrew text. This way. Right, font face works everywhere. Right? It works great. Except you need this crazy syntax to make all the different browsers work with it. Who here knows about this, the bulletproof font face syntax? Yes, font spraying, this is it. It's basically, you have to provide like a source with the EOT, which is for old Internet Explorer, and IE9's compatibility mode. And then you have to follow it with a very specific structure of whatever. You'll see other syntaxes flying around the web, especially one with a smiley face. Don't use those. Use this, and if you don't remember it, just Google font spraying bulletproof, just bulletproof font face syntax. This is it. This is the way to do it so that all the browsers accept your fonts. And it also means that you need to supply your fonts in all these formats. So you need to provide an EOT, a WAP, a TTF, and an SVG for old versions of iOS. It's ridiculous, but this is where we are in 2013. Sorry guys, that's the way it is. Okay, font feature settings. Right, so there's all sorts of awesome tricks in fancy typography that people have been doing for years. Ligatures, and swashes and all sorts of fancy typographical terms that you don't need to really care about, except that they make your type better. So for example, if you have a script font, you have all these things that don't connect. Well, that's silly. They could connect because sometimes when people design fonts, they'll take pairs of characters that are supposed to touch each other in some fashion and actually make one glyph for the two of them. Whenever one comes after another, use this glyph instead of the two of them together. That's a ligature. So for example, the connection here between the U and the R and the E and the S, those are actually ligatures. You can see how they're connected. And up until font feature settings, or whatever it's called, you couldn't actually control this from within CSS. It was the worst thing ever. It sucked. I hated it as a typographer. It burned inside like yesterday's chili. It was bad. And swash alternates, that's just nice to have. Like, you have fonts that have like these nice alternative, like, beautiful blah, blah, blah. You couldn't turn them on. Even if it's in the font file, no web browser knew how to access them. So CSS3 to the rescue. Oh no, there's other stuff. Sorry, numerals. There's also numerals that you couldn't do. And this is actually something that hurt worse than the ligatures. In good fonts, there's like 4, actually more, different kinds of numbers, numerals, right? There's old style and lining numerals. If you look, old style numerals are the kind that go above and below the ascender and the baseline. They look like uppercase and lowercase letters. They mix better in text that's like body text with uppercase and lowercase letters. Whereas in titles, you might want to use lining numerals that show up like this, or any kind of like data visualization where you have like big numbers. It looks funny to have them like go below and above. It just doesn't look nice. Good fonts have these numbers in them. Same thing for proportional and tabular. Proportional numbers, right? A 0 is wider than a 1, but sometimes you need numbers to line up because you're showing like a receipt or a sum or anything that needs to like, add up. So you want tabular, it's basically like monospaced numerals inside the same font. Like you'll have the same numbers, just monospaced. And you couldn't actually specify this. You could only get one set of numerals. Now, font feature settings to the rescue. You can actually do this now. Font feature settings, and then you have like this dictionary of like these 4-letter magic spells, okay? Which unfortunately is the best thing we have right now. These are the names of the open type features that you can activate or deactivate for your font. Somewhere in the slide deck, I actually posted like a link to that, or just look it up on MDN. Yeah. No, only open type. So it has to be like WAF or TTF, depending on like TrueType can also support it. Most WAF files, .wav files are open type. So no, not all font flavors support this. And more to the point, most web services don't actually supply a lot of these fancy features because it makes the file size bigger, but I'll get to that in a second. The bottom line is font feature settings. Look it up on MDN, Mozilla Developer Network, or whatever it's called. All these codes, what you can use to turn on and off. Just Google for this and you'll find lots of demos. It looks great in browsers that support it. Yeah. So, like I said, there's lots of hacks. These features add size to fonts. Lots of web fonts don't include them, even if the original font did, which means that the web font services like Typekit, sometimes they publish the same font twice, one with these kinds of numbers and one with these kinds of numbers, and if you wanted them, you had to download them twice, which sucked for your users. But it's still pretty awesome. Don't forget your vendor prefixes because this still requires them. But it's on the track to standardization. Here's all the links to all the documentation, blah, blah, blah. And keep your eye on compatibility tables. Not all of them are supported. Okay. Before we keep going, everybody take a deep breath. I know that was like a lot of information. All the stuff from here on out is like fun little toys. So it's all good. Icon fonts. Who here uses icon fonts? Icon fonts are awesome because they're vector, which means that they're friendly for like retina displays. You don't need to do anything. They're stylable. You can change how they look, like their colors and their shadows and whatever in CSS. No sprites. Anybody who's worked with like sprites in CSS knows that it can be a pain in the ass. Only one HTTP request. You get like a whole lot of images from one HTTP request. And it gzips well, and it like slices and dices and makes julienne fries and all this fine stuff. Yes, makes coffee too. Good coffee, not just like bots. There's like a zillion of them out there. Some of them are free, some of them cost money. But yeah, and use Google and find them.
There's one extra that actually can make icon fonts from SVGs. Fontcustom.com.
Fontcustom.com. You heard it here first.
Icon move.
Yeah, they're all great. This is like exploding because it's a very easy way to put like these vector symbols in your thing. You can also like alter them using CSS. It's great. But how do you use it in terms of CSS? How do you make it semantic and not like gross up your markup? For modern browsers, it's pretty easy. You use icon before, or whatever, use the before pseudo selector, and you use one of the data attributes. So data-icon equals whatever is the letter in the font that generates the symbol that you want it to generate. And different fonts map different symbols onto different letters onto different. So like in this icon font, maybe P is like a heart, and in that one, maybe it's like a user or whatever it is. Like different sets have different things. But this is great because basically, semantically speaking, it's empty, and I'm filling it up using CSS. And if I don't have like support for this in my browser, it'll just look empty, which is fantastic. That's exactly what I want for old shitty browsers that don't support this. Except if I want to support old shitty browsers, I can. I just need to do it differently. I need to actually put like the P inside the span, which makes my markup look less semantic and blah blah blah, whatever. Anyway, but this is a workaround. But like P equals a heart or H equals a heart. That's kind of random, right? Unicode has a lot of symbols in Unicode. Like there's like a pile of poop in Unicode. Does everybody know about that? Yeah. So you can actually specify like a lot of these icons. The better icon fonts try to map like existing symbols onto sensible Unicode code points. Even if the default symbols don't look the same, they'll still be better. And so you can actually do this if your font supports it. You can do like data icon equals like Unicode U plus whatever the fuck it is for hearts. But your font needs to support it. Toys. 2 more toys. Lettering and fittext. These are both by Paravel. Everybody knows about Trent Walton and Paravel. They're like some fancy designers out in Texas, web developers. They did the new Microsoft.com. Respect, because it's hard to convince Microsoft to do this kind of stuff. It's like all responsive and beautiful and shit. Lettering and fittext. Lettering.js is just a nice way to like add hooks to your text for styling. So it'll wrap each letter in a span, and fittext will like inflate your text or shrink it in order to fit inside like a responsive layout. So if you want your text to be the full width of an element, but you didn't know how to do that before, here's some JavaScript that will do that for you. So lettering.js, for example, this thing that they did at the top with like making the letters look like child's play blocks, but you can use it for a lot of really awesome stuff. Go check out this project. They have a ton of demos. It's used all over the web. You'll notice some sites that you didn't know that use this, that actually use this. And fittext. Fittext is this, and it's great for when you want like big blocky headlines. You should never ever use this on body text because it's just wrong. Don't do that. Ever. And this is like the combination of the two. This is kind of what it looks like. When you look at Trent Walton's blog, this fit to scale thing, every letter here has like a CSS transform applied to it and like even odd colors with background images and whatever. And when you look at it on mobile, it's still transformed per letter, blah, blah, blah. Maybe they're actually using like, nth child to do like even odd. That would actually be awesome. I didn't look at I bet you they did because they're awesome. And it also fits like nicely into this like responsive viewport. So that's how you can achieve that sort of effect. Make it look nice on all your browsers. Awesome, right? Typography is like a deep, deep pool. I scratched like the surface. Like I said, we've been doing this for literally hundreds of years. There's a lot of best practices and conventions, things that you don't even know that you've been exposed to. For example, ligatures. Any magazine you open and you look for the words FI, look for like anything like finishing or whatever, just look for like an FI in a printed magazine. You'll notice that the dot of the I and the F, they aren't actually separate letters. They merge them into one shape because it looks nicer. You've never noticed this until now because you're not into typography. But now you will, and you'll notice like that there's a zillion little typographical tricks that are used to make text look better, more legible, easier for you to process visually and do something about. And finally, we're starting to be able to do the same level of like polish and refinement for the web. So go make something and don't be shy. Come talk to me. Thanks. Questions?
Yeah. Question?
Yes.
There's a truism that for computer displays we use sans serif, but with today's displays, is that still true?
So it's a truism that you should use sans serif for computer displays. It's actually not. All of the science on the matter says that there is actually not really a difference. You should use whatever makes more sense for your text. It has more to do with convention and expectations. For years, body text was always supposed to be a serif text. The argument was that the serifs, the little like chupchikim on the text, which I don't actually have any serif on my screen right now. These are all sans serif fonts. If you think of like Times, right? Everybody knows Times. Or Georgia, you have like the little things on the edges of the, like the, you know, all the edges of the terminals, whatever. Those were supposed to aid legibility because they kept you tracking, your eye tracking along the same line. There was like all this pseudoscience explanations for why serif was better for body text, and you should use sans serif for like big headlines. It's still kind of like what you learn your first day at design school. But it's bullshit. Like all of the usability studies that have ever been performed show that there's no correlation between use of serif and sans on legibility, on comprehensibility, on anything that matters to your users using the text. The only thing that does affect it is whether or not you chose something that makes sense. Like if people are going to read something that looks like the New York Times, but you said it in like Helvetica, they'll be all weirded out because they expect the newspaper to be in a serif font. That's the only thing that matters. Everything else is like sipore safta. It's not backed up by science.
You didn't say anything about mobile browsers for all the cool.
So yeah, I pointed at the end of every section to the Can I Use website because mobile browser support, it's not like I can say what I know about iOS, but really you have to deal with like 15 versions of Android browsers and like Opera Mini. And then there's like the different versions of iOS, and not all of them support the same things. For example, iOS up to like version 4.1 supported only SVG for type, and from 4.2 or 5 or whatever onward, it supported TrueType fonts. So it's like too complex a thing for me to just paste into my presentation. Just go like Google like Can I Use and the name of the feature, and it'll show you like a nice table of. Everybody knows caniuse.com? Yes, good.
Firefox, there is a problem across the main phone.
Yes, especially when you're serving from S3, except no longer because they finally added support for cores. Firefox has a very restrictive security policy compared to, say, WebKit, Chrome, Safari, blah, 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 where it won't load fonts cross-domain. Unless the other end has cores headers that say, you're allowed to load fonts for me, like, you know. And for a long time, Amazon's S3 didn't support that. So if you wanted to host your fonts somewhere other than your website, like your static media, it was kind of a pain in the ass. But ever since they added it, it's great. But 99% of the time, you should be using one of the web font services like Typekit, or Google Web Fonts, or FontDeck, or anything else, because they take a lot of the headache out of serving web fonts. You just, I want these fonts in my font kit, publish, go, bam, I got a little bit of JavaScript, and here I have some fonts. Plus, for like very little money, you get access to a very large library of fonts. Was there another question in there? Besides me spilling out?
Yeah, I have a question. Do you know more beautiful fonts in Hebrew?
There's a couple of foundries that I know that do web fonts explicitly. First of all, there's the free versions, the free things that are out there are Aleph and Carmela. Those are the two that I've run into. If you guys have more, please share the wealth.
You have Kulmus fonts that you have.
Kulmus?
You have to convert them yourself. They are the GPL fonts.
Okay, so they're probably ugly as shit, right?
Yeah, but they have really nice biblical fonts.
They have really nice biblical fonts. If you want a really nice biblical fonts, the people from Gentium, what's their name? SIL, S-I-L. They have like SIL something, which is SIL Ezra? Yeah, okay. That's a really nice, if you want something with like full nikud for doing any kind of biblical anything, that's the font you want to use, all the other ones are shit. Or I don't know, maybe this Kulmus one is okay. What?
Aleph is fully good.
Oh yes? Okay, well then, I'm sorry. Aleph is really beautiful. I've only been using it for like a week. I've also used Almoni from Aleph Aleph Aleph, and generally, like, he sells his entire catalog. Just go to like ALEF times 3.com or something like that. Alephalephaleph.com. He's a local typographer, and he made a whole bunch of fonts, and they're all available as web fonts in exchange for money. Sorry? They. He is not available for money?
No. It's a group of typographers.
Okay. Oh, I didn't know that. I thought it was just one guy.
No.
See? Learn something new every day. So yeah, those are the really nice ones. There's also like Oded Ezer. I think he has maybe some web fonts. And I don't know if Master Font by now has like a web font licensing policy.
They have like the worst pricing ever.
Why am I not surprised? Yeah, okay, fuck that. However, you can actually I know you can do Master fonts for like reasonable money if you don't buy it directly from Master Font, if you license it through myfonts. Myfonts.com, they have the full Master Font catalog, and I think you can get web font options on all of them. So that's like a nice hack.
אחרון? Font icons.
Ken.
It really works in 97 and 98.
Yes, but like you can't do the nice semantic like thing. You have to do the gross markup version.
It's work.
It works. IE, surprisingly, a little known fact, was one of the first, I think maybe the first browser to support web fonts with their proprietary EOT embedded OpenType, right? Yes, okay. Back in like version 4, believe it or not. This is like 10 years ago. But nobody else supported that version, and it still lingers around. It's like the one thing that like Internet Explorer didn't suck at more than every other browser. It's true.
Also box model.
Sorry? Oh, also the box model. Yeah, they totally got that one right. Star box sizing border box. All the time, every site. I freaking love it. So yeah, those are the two things that Microsoft got right. But everything else,
Also,
total
font
fail.
stretch.
Font stretch?
Yeah, it's also supported.
It's also supported, but that's like IE10. Now it's no longer like a fair comparison because like IE9, as much as I don't like Internet Explorer, it's really like less painful is the nicest thing I can say about it.
תודה לידן.
תודה.